Trigonometry is the part of math where the angles and the sides speak to each other. And if you've heard my other videos, this is a little repetitious, but it's so important you understand that anytime we're mixing sides and angles, we're dealing with trigonometry. So just as a refresher, again, this might be a little repetitious if you've seen the other videos, but we're using the trig button in our calculator. And for this video, since we're going to be finding the angle of a triangle, we're going to be using the inverse trig functions. So again, once I click that trig button, I'm going to go to this screen and we're going to be using these functions down here. These functions help me to find an angle. We call them inverse trig, or when you get to algebra 2, you might call them arc sine, arc cosine, arc tangent, but that's what we use when we're finding an angle using our TI Inspire. So let's take a look at an example problem. Whenever I give you an example problem, it's always in the description of the video, a link that'll bring you to that region. So if you want to follow along with this example, click the link, print out question number 26 on the August 2019 Regents, and you can follow along with the video. So the very first thing we do is read the problem. An airplane took off at a constant angle of elevation. I'm going to highlight that, angle of elevation, after a plane traveled 25 miles and reached an altitude of 5 miles as modeled below. So in this situation, I always like to circle numbers to make sure they're being used. But in this situation, my numbers are clearly marked in the diagram. The only thing I need to do is mark the angle that I want. And it's really important to remember whether it's angle of elevation or depression, we're always looking for that bottom acute angle. And if you're unsure, we can talk about the parallel lines and what makes that true, but that's for a separate video. So that X, that bottom acute angle, is always what I'm looking for, whether it says angle of elevation or angle of depression. So now that I have my triangle, let's start labeling the sides. Before you do anything else, you should always find the right angle and mark the side opposite it. So this is the hypotenuse. No matter what, it is always across from the right angle. The only sides that differ are the opposite and the adjacent, and that depends where this angle is. So even though there's an X there, it is the angle that we're looking for, or that we're referring to in this situation. And the two sides that make up that angle should be screaming at you, quite literally. So I call this the adjacent side, because adjacent means next to, but my little trick is that it should quite literally scream. So the A here, the H here should be, it's screaming because it's squeezing that angle. It's cheesy, but it works. Then the side opposite that angle is my opposite. So now we're going to recall SOHCAHTOA. Again, if you're not sure, you can watch our other video on labeling a triangle. When I'm looking at SOHCAHTOA, it's important to understand which sides I have and which sides I need. So in this case, I'm looking for an angle, so I have a lot of sides. I have my opposite side and I have my hypotenuse, which means we're going to be using sine in this case because there is no adjacent. It's empty, there's no X there, there's no number there. Now when I'm looking for this angle, I'm going to set up my sine function the way that I always do. So that's sine, and in sine always goes the angle. So in the trig function, we always put the angle, in this case, it's X. And that's going to equal my opposite side over my hypotenuse side. So my opposite side is 5, and my hypotenuse is 25. This is where things get a little bit different. So if you notice, the X is inside that function. When the X is in the function, that's when we need to use those inverse trig functions. And that means to get X by itself, this is what we're going to type into our calculator. Sine inverse of 5 over 25. So a couple of things. You don't need to write this step if you don't want to, but I do think it's helpful. That is the way you're going to enter it into your calculator. I'm going to show you the screen in a moment. And you can use the fraction button. So the fraction button is the button next to the 9, and that can be extremely helpful. So again, in your TI Inspire, if you enter that, this is what will come up on the screen. So you use that inverse trig button, which is why I have this little -1 here. And in the parentheses is that 5 over 25. So it looks just like this. So that means my X is equal to, and now in this case, I'm going to write down 11.5369590328. So this is, I'll even put a ... at the end because even though my calculator's saying it's ending, it's not. So this is really important because this is an extended response question. You should never round right from the calculator. You're going to write down that long, ugly number, and then you're going to decide where to round. This is really important because if you round incorrectly, but show me the work first so I can see that you rounded incorrectly, you can get most of the points. So in this case, they want us to round to the nearest tenth. The 10th place is where this 5 is. And this 3 is not big enough to change that 5. So that means my final answer is going to be 11.5 degrees. So this is a short response question. It's worth 2 points. So you want to be really careful that you don't make any errors because it's easy to lose silly points. And you want to make sure you show all your work so you can get partial credit. The only thing that I want to point out is one part of this calculator here, and that's where it says degree. It's really important you see those 3 little letters in the top right-hand corner of your calculator. Otherwise, you won't get the correct answer when you're doing trigonometry. So if it's incorrect, just click on that battery or settings icon and change it to degree mode. And you can do that as soon as you get your test. So this has been how to find an angle using right triangle trigonometry. If you have any more questions, there's additional videos on the channel on how to label our sides, how to know which trig function to use, and how to find the missing side of a right triangle.